Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin. This podcast is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. Testimonial Hero creates strategic video testimonials to help you close trust gaps and ultimately close more deals faster. On this episode, I'm joined by Brett McGrath, who is the VP of Marketing at The Juice. We talk about the importance of investing in content, especially right now in this economy, why curation matters, and how to distribute content effectively. Hey, Brett, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dustin. Pumped to be here.
So we're going to be talking about, content in general, which is a big bucket, but specifically content curation, getting your content out there. And I want to start off with maybe a bit of a broad question, but I think a lot of us are struggling with is, why are people struggling to get their content seen? I feel like people have no problem producing content and there's a lot out there, but it's hard to stand out right now.
It is. And I think about content marketing a lot in the history of it. And I remember I'm a long time B2B marketer. It's all I've done. So I feel like my career, I followed the role of the content marketer pretty closely. And I remember the time at like my first software company where content marketing was a new thing because of inbound marketing. And we hired our first content marketer, and the content marketer kind of sat over in the corner and just pumped out a bunch of blog posts every day and did it in a certain time because the algorithms love that. And then we'd see new people come to our website, then you'd see leads. And it worked. And that was like inbound marketing fueled by content. And then all companies started to do it over and over again. And I think they reached this point of saturation where kind of this content hamster wheel just stopped working. Yeah. I think we all once a year or maybe a couple times a year, or me maybe a few times a month, I look at kind of Scott Brinker's MarTech infographic for inspiration. And every year you look at that thing, the dots on it for the brand logos become tinier and tinier. And I think what we need to tell ourselves is that everybody on this chart is doing the exact same thing. They're all creating content. They're all publishing it. And I think the struggle is it's just become oversaturated, and a lot of the content is going unseen, or we like to call falling in internet purgatory. So I think that's a struggle that almost any marketer or content person can relate with. And really kind of this next evolution of content marketing is going on offense with your content or promoting it in a way that's strategic. And so that's where I think distribution comes in and the power of distribution. And so that's something we think and talk a lot about at The Juice.
Yeah, distribution has also changed a lot since those early days with, a spot, your blog post, it was originally just keywords, then topic clusters. And I just feel like slowly people are shifting away from search, and maybe SEO people are cursing at me right now, but
they are.
I feel like for educational content, maybe I'm speaking for myself, but a lot of people are drifting away from search. They go to communities, they go to LinkedIn, they follow very specific newsletters, for example. So I think that's different. Like, yeah, you still have to do SEO, probably more focused on your product and maybe down funnel a bit, but I do think distribution has changed, and it's harder now. It's not, follow this checklist of best practices.
I just asked a community that I'm a part of, shout out Superpath. It's a community for content marketers. I literally just asked the community, like, what are you reading? What are you finding the most value from right now? And it was interesting. I actually got a comment that was super passionate and emphatic. That was like, I do not go to brands' websites or their blogs and consume content anymore. And it wasn't just one person. That was pretty consistent. And kind of the top sources that content marketers or marketers in general are learning from right now are newsletters, like you mentioned, LinkedIn, podcasts. And I think this trend that we're seeing that people want to consume content from people outside of brands. And so I think when we're thinking about distribution, the power of the individual creator and the influencer, if you will, on platforms like LinkedIn has only become more and more important to get your content seen.
Yeah. And even, talking about individuals, there's also a bunch of different ways to create the content. And this is something we try to mix up. We're a video company, so obviously we're video first. I do think that's the best way to get like a big piece and chop it down and distribute it. But that's a whole nother angle now where, you kind of have to be doing video in some shape or form. Whereas it's not just, the written word anymore. Like you said, content person in the corner writing 2 blog articles a day. So that shifted a lot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think identifying what those mega trends are, or just like
Yeah.
figuring out, putting yourself in the shoes of the person that you're creating for. Like, I think about my content consumption habits, and it's like when I have a moment and the break in the action, when I'm not working, not doing a podcast recording, not in a meeting, we're grabbing our phones and we're scrolling. And it's so figuring out, like we were just talking about LinkedIn and the algorithms and how things work. And I think it's just starting to, like, you got to be a student. You got to understand what's performing and what's not. And if you see something like a podcast or you see something like a video consistently that is at the top of your algorithms, probably something that you should consider investing on as a creator in order to get your brand seen by the right people.
Yeah, and I think there's something to like the repetition side, like you said, of seeing a person or seeing a brand a lot where you start to trust it because, my personal habit is I'll go on LinkedIn every day. There's 3 or 4 people who ask me to subscribe to their newsletter. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. It kind of depends on how they've been putting out good stuff. But even then, it can be a struggle to follow and read them all. So realistically, I'm subscribed to a whole bunch. Actually, I read 3, maybe 2 consistently. And that's because I just feel like stuff isn't tailored to me. There's just too much noise. So I, shut it off, put it away, and then try to find something specific. I think a lot of people are struggling with that.
Yeah, and I think we noticed this at the Juice, and for anyone who's listening who's not familiar, content curation platform for B2B marketing and sales folks, and a distribution channel for brands who want to reach them. But I've talked a lot about how the Juice is the largest library of marketing and sales content on the planet. And then I was like saying that over and over, and I was thinking about it for a second. It's like, okay, so if we're trying to help with the content overwhelm, saying stuff like that probably isn't the best. And so, like, adding words, which is what we're doing with our product team. But just as a marketer, I was like, I got to tie in what we're doing on the product side. But tying in the words like curated for you it has helped us break through a little bit. And we just released, I think a month ago or a couple weeks ago, topic pages. But we're finding that, curation is really important. A lot of people just don't want to go to the search bar, but they want to follow topics that resonate with their role. So that's something we are trying to help in this flooded sea of content to help kind of separate the signal through the noise. But yeah, I think curation is the way that brands can help break through outside of just the individual creator stuff that we talked about.
Yeah, maybe a weird parallel I'm going to throw out there, but I had a conversation with someone last week about communities, and it was kind of the same thing where I'm part of these giant communities where there's just too much stuff, there's too many channels, too much noise, and I don't go to them. And then I'm part of a couple of very niche communities on a specific topic where I will actually hunt out content because it's less noisy. I know what I'm going to get. And I think we're just so used to notifications and bells and everything going off that when there's too much, we're just like, nope, not going there. Can't handle it.
Yeah, and it's kind of niching down is kind of contradictory to how we have been raised as marketers, right? It's
Yeah.
like volume, the more is better, quantity, quantity, quantity. But I think we as just individuals that are creating, that are trying to break through, I think the more focused you can be with the content and the message and the questions you are answering and the topic, like, I think the focus should be on few but higher quality as opposed to trying to create a piece of marketing content for all marketers. That's the stuff that typically falls on deaf ears and doesn't perform well.
Yeah. Well, that and for the really broad based stuff, you're competing against the HubSpots of the world who
And you're
have,
not going to win.
yeah, 500 of those content people in the corner, right? They got their own office. Um,
Exactly.
One thing I'm curious about, you mentioned Juice has a lot of content. Obviously, you're focused on curation. And I know, like we spoke before about people can kind of measure the success of their content based on people who are engaging. Is that going into their funnel? I'm curious if you have any data or insights or thoughts on types of content that seems to be resonating a bit more.
Yeah. So it's funny you asked that question. I'm in the middle of creating a report, and the report's specific to a medium. So the report's going to be the state of the B2B podcast consumer. And what we're doing with this report is analyzing trends in what consumers on the Juice are doing and interacting, how they're interacting with podcasts. And I'm like right in the middle of it, down in the weeds. But two things that stand out to me that I can remember top of mind on this question are having guests and curating other people outside of your own thoughts and views, that really matters. And our data is supporting that. And then the other thing, which I hadn't thought about up until, my early days of just, working at an email company, but actionable headlines really, really matter. Like the how to's and using action words and it can be not just podcast, it can be your YouTube video, it can be article, whatever, translate across some podcast medium. But those are two things just in some work that I'm currently diving into that stand out.
Yeah, the how-to one I think is interesting because I just kind of dumped all over search, but that's how people search as well, right? Like they want to know, they go there because they want to learn a specific thing. And theory is great and all, but as someone who went to school for marketing, I don't use a lot of the theory. So, the specific actionable stuff, that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's like fundamentals, taking a step back. I think
Yeah.
podcast, like consuming a piece of long form content like a podcast is a commitment. And it is, in order to gain that commitment, like the people who we're trying to connect with, gain their attention, they want to feel like they are going to benefit or learn something by the end of it. And so just in digging through the data, like I have rethought the way, we have a podcast, Modern Day Marketer, and we publish every week. And it has me thinking differently about how we organize the titles in order to attract more people. And it's just a couple small tweaks here and there, but it was something I wasn't mindful of until I saw the data to support it.
Yeah, we'll have to talk after about that because, obviously I have a podcast. We're on it right now. And same thing, we think about what titles, and it's tough to run those experiments on your own. Because let's say, we do an episode a week, couple clips a week, let's say 100, 150 clips. It's not enough data for me to tell. Like something will work really well, and I don't know why. I look at it and there's just not enough to actually tell.
Totally. Yeah. And those pains that I have that you just described, we're hoping that when this report gets released, which not sure when this will go live, but we're hoping that the report will be launched here in September. So we'll have to make sure that there's a link or something shared along with the episode so people can go back and check it out.
Yeah, this will come out a month from now. It's early September, so timing should be perfect there.
Perfect.
And then one thing, we touched on this a little bit before we went on air, actually, but you mentioned, focusing on content and doubling down now is kind of more important than ever. It is, content in general is a longer term play. Like you'll get short wins, but it's a consistency, long term play. All, I would say, marketers and CMOs right now are getting squeezed pretty hard on, it's hard to sell, do quick things, get us quick wins. Any thoughts on that? Like how CMOs can make that shift and sell that internally?
Yeah, I would say that I have heard, and I'll call them horror stories because they're horror stories to me. If I was the marketer working inside the organization where these changes were happening, and like the undeniable forces that have come on where budgets are getting squeezed, resources are being allocated, but like then to hear and content is getting cut, to me, that would be a red flag of, you know what, I'm not sure I should probably work here anymore. And so I've been investigating this like pretty heavily through the podcast and network that I've been building. And the one individual that I've been going after, the persona type, is the CMO, because I want to understand, like, are you this CMO who's cutting this stuff? If not, like, what are the reasons why are you investing more? And I think it's just this commitment to the long game, as you mentioned. And I recently spoke with Warren Daniels, who's the chief marketing officer at Binder, a really incredible marketer. It's amazing. Like after you talk with really smart CMOs, I always am like, man, there's a reason why this person is in this seat doing this. But he mentioned that, investing more in the content and the experience now, in designing content operations around the content, and also like taking an offensive approach to content. Like he feels by going harder on that right now, it's going to help Binder separate, because other competitors or brands that are going up against right now aren't doing the same thing. So I just find nuggets and little stories like that fascinating. And I just think, yeah, it's tough because everyone wants results right now. But I think I've always viewed content and the creation around content as like planting a bunch of seeds. You're planting a bunch of seeds, and it's going to grow, and it just takes some time.
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of how we're viewing it. So I'm in a role now where it's marketing and sales. So I have both here as a VP of revenue. And we're seeing that on the sales side as well, where we're getting people who come in and say, heard about you guys because of a LinkedIn ad or some content or podcast or something we put out. And they flat out say, I have no money. I'm not going to buy now, but I'm curious. And, 2024, I get a new budget. And if we were just hitting people in market searching, we would miss those people. So we're kind of building this long-term pipeline. And it's interesting being sometimes marketing and sales are disconnected, kind of angry siblings that hate each other. It's nice having them together because you actually see that and how the market is right now. We've had so many people who, yeah, I'd love to buy, but I don't have money. Let's reconnect next year. So I'm thinking 2024 is fingers crossed, going to be a better year for everyone.
Yeah, and those what you just described, it's those stories are so powerful when we hear them, and I always I try to have a folder when I hear that from someone or get feedback from our sales team, have a folder and stash those things, and or have a spreadsheet where you can start tracking those brands because it's really challenging in the moment because small teams, small marketing, small sales team, we're not going to track everything. It's impossible
Yeah.
because we don't have the time. So I think being able to at least, internally market and communicate those types of stories to your team and to your leaders helps validate what you're doing because we don't always get the responses we want or those direct responses we're trying to get. We did a podcast. Next thing we know, we've got a requested demo. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I wish it did. It would make my job a lot easier. I know where to put money, but you know, there's a gut aspect of marketing, a gut and anecdotal, how are people saying they heard you that I think at least now there's a shift to paying attention to that.
Yeah.
And then one kind of on that topic, actually, not quite attribution, but I want to talk a little bit about content ROI and how you are measuring, because I know that's a big part of the juice as well, is trying to add that visibility so people can measure the success of the content. So how do you think through that internally with your own content even?
Yeah, so I think it's one, it's the guts. There is a stuff, gut portion to it that is sourcing sales on how their last meeting, how they heard about us, and just keeping that drumbeat of communication open. That's very much a part of what we do at the Juice in an early stage, and taking note of that so we can know if we need to invest more of our time in certain areas. But then also just with the Juice specifically, we were getting this question with our customers and early stage company, and you're trying to you're helping them. You can see it in the data, and it's how can we better connect the dots? Because now the CFO is in the picture, and now
Yeah.
they're having their curiosity is around every piece of software you're investing in. And so what we're doing is we're connecting the dots between what's happening on the Juice and what's happening with our customers' CRM. So, whether it's HubSpot or Salesforce, we can we can track the engagement and exposure that a brand has with their content on the Juice and influence and source revenue that's happening in those CRMs. So that's something over the last year or so we've been working on, have released, and our customers who have the integration set up are really happy about.
Nice. Yeah, I think there is something to be said to just, this sounds overly simple, but it's basically what marketing is getting your message in front of the right people consistently. And that's one way to measure it. We do a similar thing. I mentioned cold LinkedIn ads before because it's one of our strongest channels, really, because we have pretty defined list of companies that we go after. But we can see that as well. You see just the engagement, how many people at this company have seen your ad, and then the demo form comes in. Can I say that it was because of a LinkedIn ad? No. But there is a correlation there that I think, similarly with content, you're measuring, a similar thing at an account level.
Yeah, and I'll just share this because I think about this all the time, Dustin, and
Yeah.
I think one thing we have to do as marketers, however you're tracking your work and what you're doing, the likelihood is you are way more in the weeds on the tracking, what your impact is than anyone else inside your organization. What we need to be able to do is be able to tell the story internally around those things and do it in a simple way and do it in a way that's not forgettable. And you got to keep hitting that drumbeat. I have learned this through whether it's communication on Slack, whether it's internal team meetings, just showing your work. Think the better we can be as storytellers internally, just as good as we are externally, the chance that your boss or your boss's boss is going to invest more in content when they can connect with those stories likely goes up.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Otherwise, they just look at how many MQLs you brought in. They ain't done anything else. And we all know how that game goes.
Yes,
So
not good.
No, definitely want to avoid that. And then just, you mentioned how-to side. So I think we'll wrap on this probably tactically. You mentioned how-tos, you mentioned podcasts, and I know everyone has different plays on their podcast, how they utilize it, how they repurpose it, how they distribute it. So I'm curious on your side, like, what is your process there? Not in the weeds, and what's something specifically that's working really well there?
Yeah. So our view on Modern Day Marketer, which is our podcast, has always been twofold. One, how, we have a podcast because it helps us streamline our content. And also the second or the second bucket is it is the magnet to help us connect with people that we have no business connecting with. And so when you're consistently going into it with like these goals or objectives in mind, I think it helps set the right expectations internally. And like when we produce a new episode of Modern Day Marketer, like, my team is not saying like, do we have a new customer right now? It's like, that's just not how it works. But what we do find the tracking is like, okay, this podcast episode with this individual led to what in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months. And typically what we find is I'm on their podcast, or we might have a new customer conversation, or there's a feature in a newsletter, or there's a webinar, or those individuals are coming back on our content platform. So I am a firm believer, and probably because I'm biased, because this is where our product is set up and designed to do, is to be a curator. And I believe that the more that we as marketers can be curators, the more really good stuff happens. And I've been testing this theory for the last 2.5 years at the Juice. We started Modern Day Marketer literally a month into me being a part of the Juice as employee number 2 or 3. You can argue with our head of growth, but it's been a transformational thing for me. And I'm a firm believer anywhere I work, there will always be something like a show and a podcast, I think, because it helps unlock and open levels for you as a brand.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially with neither one of us are part of Microsoft giant team. We have small teams. So the other part is other people help create the content for you a little bit, right? Like I can have conversations with people who know a hell of a lot more about something than I do that I could not personally write about. And then I get to repurpose it and, get their audience there.
Yeah. And you were on our podcast, and then I saw your LinkedIn post. And when I saw you lob that out there, I was like, I can't wait to see how many people raise their hand for this, because every marketer or sales, they want to talk about what they're doing, right? It's an opportunity to promote their brand, what they're doing, or their philosophies. And so that was fun for me to see. And I launch kind of the open question out in different communities I'm involved with. And it takes about like 5 minutes to see how many replies I got. So I had fun, and it's the reason why we're connecting on this.
Yeah, no, that was an interesting experiment. Like I saw Dave Gerhardt did that and of course got a million responses. I'm like, we're probably going to get 5 or 6, but we booked half a dozen good guests from
That's awesome.
a 2-minute LinkedIn post. So it worked out.
Totally.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Brett. It was fun chatting with you again. As you mentioned, I was on your podcast before. If people want to learn more about, you, what you talk about, or the Juice, where should they go for that?
Yeah. So I would go join the Juice. It's free. It's like I mentioned, but I'll say it connected this way. It's the largest library of B2B marketing and sales resources on the planet, curated for you. Yeah. So you can join the Juice, app.thejuicehq.com. It's free. We release Modern Day Marketer every Friday. So you can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. And also there's a newsletter companion piece to Modern Day Marketer, which drops Fridays too. And you can find that on our web. You can sign up on our website, thejuicehq.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. So I'll include those in the show notes for everyone. And again, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to this episode. My key takeaway is how people want to consume content from individuals and not brands. I mean, we see this every day if we go on LinkedIn or anywhere else. And I'm just one data point here, but I can't remember the last time I read any content from a brand. Everything I read, watch, or consume is from an individual. And part of that is because individuals are just more trustworthy than brands. It's a better way to build trust with your audience. If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and hit follow, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.